back to our Web3 Metaverse series. Once again, or for those who are joining this session for the first time, my name is Jackson Richards. I'm VP of Strategy at Direct Agents, and I'm really excited to have Trevor Clune join us for this session. Trevor is our Senior Media Strategist, and the real reason we're so excited to have Trevor on is Trevor is one of our resident kind of like Web3 NFT enthusiasts, just from like a user standpoint. And I feel like that perspective is often missing in a lot of the content we see around Web3 and Metaverse and things like that. So I think we'll be able to have a really cool conversation. So welcome, Trevor.
Thanks, Jackson. Glad to be here.
So, just to kind of kick things off, one of the common criticisms or just comments I see from people around Web3 or kind of like Metaverse or NFTs in general is that now is not necessarily the time for brands to get involved or for real users to get involved, because when you look anything these things up on Google or whatever it is, almost like 9 out of the 10 top results are about how to buy NFTs and flip them, or buy land in the metaverse and flip them, right? It's mostly about like making money schemes. And while I think there's some truth to that, there's certainly a lot more to it than that. But I think if we look on things like OpenSea, we see that a lot of trading of NFTs is down, and interest in NFTs is down from where we were a few months ago. And to me, that just shows that was never the long-term promise of these technologies really in the first place. And this is just kind of like an initial boom in that sort of application. But the actual user applications are still being developed and are going to continue to unfold for a period of time. So Trevor, for you as someone who is engaged in Metaverse and NFTs and kind of everything related to that, what are some of the kind of cool examples and what does this really mean to you from a user perspective?
Yeah, so I think first of all, to address kind of where the space is right now in terms of, okay, there's a lot of flipping, there's a lot of buying, selling. It's really just making money is, I think at the forefront of where the space is. But I think taking that into account is missing the longer term picture. I think the longer term picture of this, in order to really understand that, you have to understand where we came from. So it's called Web3 for a reason. There was Web 1, Web 2 that came before it. And really each of those steps has really just changed the way we have interacted with each other as a society. So Web 1 changed the way we receive information. Web 2 changed the way that we have interacted with each other, the way that we shop. It made us a global society.
Can we think of Web 2 as almost just like modern, like social media, like, people are allowed to contribute, people are allowed to post, but it's really a handful of entities that really control the forums in which people are able to do those things?
Yeah, that's exactly it. And I think that's one of the downfalls of where Web 2 is at. It is just controlled by a handful of entities at the moment. But where I think Web 3 can come in and really make another impactful shift is taking the next step from where Web 2 is at now and creating that human connection at a whole different level. So if you just think about metaverses, VR technology, that in itself is creating a whole different experience where people can interact with each other. And then in the sense also where we're viewing assets. So like you said, at the moment, Web 2, we interact on places like Google, Facebook. They own all of the interactions that take place on their platforms. But in Web 3, because it's built on a blockchain, and not to get too technical, but a blockchain is basically, the goal of it is to decentralize those interactions. So when we do that, it really puts the power back into the user space, and where everyone can now kind of have a piece of the pie and take more control over, one, their data, and then two, just the ways they're interacting in the space.
So when we think about like Web3, I think it can kind of be simply, probably oversimplified, divided into kind of like 2 categories, right? One would be like the experience category, which is probably more tied closely to metaverses, and the asset category, which is usually the conversation that we're having when we're talking about NFTs. So from the user perspective, can you kind of like talk about those two different ways of interacting with Web3 technologies?
Yeah, Jackson. So I think a good way to start there is to think, okay, what actually is a metaverse and how is it defined? And as a user, I'm kind of defining the metaverse as a digital first world. So with that said, that really shapes the way both the experience piece and the asset piece can play a part. So from the experience perspective, anything from think about Fortnite. Fortnite in this case would count as a metaverse because it is a world where people interact virtually with each other. They had, I believe it was a Travis Scott concert. Everyone from around the world went to it. That is a new experience that was available to people that hasn't previously been. And it has changed the way we can kind of interact with each other. And then from the asset perspective, what I think is key here is that the way, at least I see the metaverse shaping out, is it's not going to turn out where it's going to be, 3-4 different companies or entities owning the space. It's going to be very decentralized. There might be tens, hundreds, thousands of metaverses that end up playing out and being used in some capacity. So with that, I think the digital asset piece is how it can be used across every different metaverse. Right now, I say that because we do have examples of digital first assets and currency. If you just think within video games, again, going back to the Fortnite example, you buy skins, you buy assets that are usable within the gameplay, within that virtual world. But right now, when you buy those assets, they're staying within Fortnite. So outside of Fortnite, it's useless in that case. What I think the next step is across all of these different concepts of the metaverse is taking something from one and then being able to have the asset of equal value into another metaverse. So wherever you're at, you're interacting and sharing those assets across the ecosystem.
And that's very much not the norm yet today, right?
No, very much not the norm.
So there's a lot that I want to unpack from what you said. There's so much in there. So I think, even just taking almost that definition of the metaverse, right, is this increasingly immersive digital world that people are going to participate in. It's really, the lines between like the digital world and the physical world are already so blurred, right? And I think the metaverse, speaking broadly, is just going to represent the continued like blurred lines and evolution of these things. And I also want to unpack the idea of value as it pertains to metaverses and digital assets, because I think one of the common criticisms we see from people who, quite frankly, I think don't quite fully really understand Web3 technology is that why would anyone pay for a purely digital asset, right? Maybe we're talking about a skin in Fortnite, right? Or it could be an NFT, right? I'll tell you what, people are already doing that, especially like younger people who play video games. Like they clearly understand the value of these digital assets. They might not have value in our like normal physical world, but they have value. They help people represent who they are. They can show them off to their friends. That helps define part of their identity in the same way that wearing a band t-shirt or something like that would have represented part of our identity as a child, growing up before. So they do have real tangible values even today. And I expect that only to, continue to evolve over the coming years for sure.
Yeah, I think you touched on something that was key there, the identity piece. And it all ties back to, how we as humans interact with each other and want to project more so our status, all of that. So yeah, I think the big part of this is just understanding that this is just another way for us to communicate with each other. And, who's to say that a digital asset isn't as valuable as a physical one? If it's doing something for you in terms of communicating status, showing who you are personality-wise, identity-wise, that has real value, whether it's digital or physical.
So sneakers have kind of been this category for a long period of time where there's this hype culture surrounding them. People, buy and trade and collect sneakers. And I think that has nicely kind of lended itself to being adapted as kind of a digital version of that. Can you tell me a little bit about some of the cool things that are happening in terms of like the digital sneaker space, and at least like how it lends itself to demonstrating the value of digital assets?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the sneaker point. And I think for me, I've seen a couple very interesting projects done around sneakers in the digital space. So one project that I've seen has been Steph Curry. For those of you who don't know, NBA basketball player, has his own sneaker line. He had come out along with Under Armour with a new NFT collection for his new shoe, the Genesis. And so with this collection, they of course released the digital or the physical shoe where people could buy, per usual. But also they had this NFT collection. And what you get with the NFT collection is you buy the NFT, and then they partner with a lot of the current existing metaverses, think the Sandbox, Decentraland. And what you can do with that NFT is put it on your avatar in those metaverses. So now, tying back to what we were talking about earlier, now you have kind of a versatile asset that can be used everywhere. And I think that's kind of just the first step into some of the things that are going to be possible.
Yeah, I think from a brand perspective, apparel is definitely a category that lends itself well to the metaverse, but I wouldn't say it's exclusively something that is accessible for apparel brands. I think there are a lot of examples of brands just kind of doing digital twins or digital versions of their assets that can be used in metaverses. And I love that example of the Under Armour and Steph Curry shoe example, because that's one of the more rare examples today of something that is able to be used across different metaverses. And I think that's really going to unlock value and potential for brands moving forward. One of the other things I want to make sure we touch on, and Trevor, I know it's something that you're definitely familiar with, is DAOs, which are decentralized autonomous organizations. Can you first just give us like a quick 30-second background on what they are? Yeah,
so DAOs are basically just a community of people coming together for a certain purpose. Whether that be, there was one example of people coming together, I think one of the more infamous ones, to buy a rare copy of the Constitution. So everyone kind of chipped in their money, bought some sort of token, and then used that as a way to put a bid in auction for this copy of the Constitution. So think of it, right now they're currently being utilized as almost another way of crowdfunding. Mm-hmm. But then I think there's also, similar to what we've been talking about, much more potential beyond that.
So what I'm hearing is that people who own tokens that give them participation rights within this sort of organization, or even there are companies that are kind of founded and run on this DAO model. It gives everyone who is a token holder the ability to participate and decide some of the direction that particular organization takes.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Whether you're buying the token, you're buying like an NFT that's associated with the DAO. But what that does is it grants you voting rights into a lot of the decision making that the community is making. And unlike private entities right now, private startups, everything is recorded on the public blockchain. So it's a lot more transparent in that sense too.
So I think that really speaks to a lot of the long-term value and purpose of and promise really of Web3, which is that it is decentralized and it allows people to participate in a higher ownership sort of way, right? We were talking about Web2, which is mostly the way we interact on the internet today, which is everyone's able to create content and participate, but it's really just a handful of organizations that really control those forums and the flow of that information. Whereas in Web3, which is a more token-based sort of internet, a lot of that power is returned to the people who can use those tokens as ways to participate in more meaningful and ownership sorts of ways. So before we wrap up this session, Trevor, if you are just, a regular person like you and I, but you haven't yet kind of taken that first step to start interacting with NFTs or Web3 or Metaverse, what are one or two sort of first steps that you might take to encourage someone to just start learning or start exploring?
Yeah, so honestly, I think it's as simple as doing a lot of searches on it, doing a lot of homework. So when I was really learning about the space, I was, watching YouTube videos. I think at the moment there are a lot of people who are making content around this and who have very different views. So for me, it was interesting to hear kind of everyone's different perspective, just as I was going down all those different rabbit holes of, okay, what's everyone's opinion on the space? So really, I think it can all be done for free. You don't need to sign up for any fancy course or anything like that. And once you start putting together some of this research, that's when, at least for me, I was able to start making my own opinions on the space. And I think it's only going to get bigger from here. And
I think if you are, I know a lot of our audience is going to be, brand side folks, marketing people. I really think doing some of that research that Trevor was alluding to and getting these different perspectives from different folks, people who participate in different ways, is really helpful, because we are still in the very early days of brands starting to participate and interact with these technologies and start to represent their brands in these technologies. And there really isn't a playbook that is defined yet, right? I think a lot of people are doing different sorts of tests and uncovering really cool things. And I think one of those best early steps is to just see what other folks are doing and start to think about, how can I adapt these ideas to my brand and continue to push this conversation and push these tests and experiments forward. Because the truth is that while there are very exciting things going on in this space right now, the space is still in the very early days of being defined, and everyone who participates now is going to play a major role in defining it over the years to come.
Yeah, and I think just to add to that, that's the exciting part. There's so much that still needs to be defined, and as a user, I can maybe come across something that ends up being the norm. Or as a brand, you can do a project and it becomes kind of the model for what future Metaverse Web3 projects would look like. So it really has a real early adopter feel right now, and with that comes a lot of the opportunities.
Thanks, Trevor. Really appreciate it. Great talking with you as always. Please check out our other sessions in our Web3 and Metaverse series. Once again, I'm Jackson Richards. This is Trevor Clune, and we'll see you at the next session.